Good morning, America. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. And whenever you're listening to this show, welcome to Your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the Chief, Marc Garrett. Joining me is, well, I guess from this point of view, he's the original Mark with the incorrect spelling, though. Spells it with a C, not a K, but we'll still accept him as a friend. And he is a friend. And one of my very first bosses, you've seen him before on the show, and that's Marc Gomez, retired Sergeant, California Highway Patrol. Mark, how are you today?
Real good. Good morning to everyone.
It's fun to have you. We were talking before we start recording here about I wanted to have you on for so much stuff that I feel fits like right in your wheelhouse. But today, again, as usual, there's always so much going on. But I just thought, I got to have Marc Gomez on for this, and it's a lot of topics, and we're going to delve right into it. By the way, if I'm smiling still a little bit, we were talking off air here before. We'll get into it later on, talking about a little bit of California near the end of the show, and but to the other side of the country, this is well, let's put it this way: the left is almost always in the business of accusing the right of what the left is doing. It's just, I'm sorry, it's just irrefutable from my point of view. And for those of you who want to prove me wrong, send the comments in. Love to hear from you. But I'm going to start off with like the number one example, and this is the Virginia Attorney General's race, the Attorney General candidate, Democrat candidate. Jay Jones cancels fundraiser. Now, this was October 8th. The Attorney General candidate, Jay Jones, cancels fundraiser after scandal, signaling crisis in the Dems campaign report. Now, I think most of you probably know what I'm talking about. And this is the fella whose text messages from 2022 have just recently been made public. And in those texts, Mark and the audience, he is talking about his candidate and what a rotten person he is. His opponent, and what a rotten person he is back in 2022. He says, if those guys die before me, I will go to their funerals to piss on their graves. 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, this is the opponent he's talking about, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Now, for those of you who may have gone to an Ivy League school, Pol Pot was one of the most evil despots in the 20th century. Cambodian, killed, untold numbers of people. So he is right there in line with Hitler and some other tyrants of the 20th century. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. And it goes on. And in the article here from the New York Post, it talks about, on top of that, in other words, shooting Gilbert instead of 2 mass murderers from the 20th century. This creep goes on to talk about he hopes that Gilbert's kids die as well. I want to just explore an aspect of this that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and maybe with good reason, but I still think it's a very interesting aspect of it. Before we go there, Mark, I want to get your thoughts just on this behavior coming from the party of love and equity and inclusion and peace, and the party that accuses the right wing conservatives, regular Americans, of perpetuating and promoting violence in this country.
Well, you have to look at a few things first of all that are troubling about this whole text message. Is I think the most troubling part that he's running to be the Attorney General for Virginia. So he's going to be basically the top law dog in Virginia. That's the part that to me is most disturbing. That's his train of thought. So, that to me is it's unexcusable. It should be enough to for him to be taken off the ballot for running for that position. But like you said, the part that is also troubling is that this has been the left's playbook last few years, and they promote supposedly that we want peace, love, equity, and the list goes on and on. But they have become the party of violence. If you look at everything that's gone down in the past here, and they'll excuse it. They'll they like to throw out words like Nazi, where it's lost its meaning now because everybody's a Nazi now. If you disagree with them, you're a Nazi. If you're if you have anything that is contrary to their way of thinking, then you get called names. And unfortunately, it's also the party of unhinged people. If you start looking, just look at the rallies, look at the people that show up to these protests. They're people that you cannot reason with. They are people that are unhinged, and they justify what they do with violence. They'll justify their violence, rather. They'll justify it with words like such as Nazi and dictators and things like that, things along those lines. So they've come to the point where the parties become unhinged in it, that they are willing to kill someone and then try to justify it.
It's interesting, Mark. You talk about justification. Let me read a little here from the New York Post. Most Virginia Democrats, they put Virginia in there. Most Virginia Democrats have condemned Jones's comments, but many are still publicly backing him. By the way, I don't know of a Democrat who's not publicly backing him, still publicly backing him. In the race against his opponent, incumbent Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares, this is Tim Kaine, told reporters on Tuesday that he is still a supporter of Jones, but called Jones's comments indefensible, according to Axios. Your point about him running to become the new Attorney General of Virginia is so important. This is a man who, and we read the whole thing, this text thread. He was being asked by the recipient, please stop this. And he continued with more texts calling for violence against Gilbert, who was a political opponent in the Virginia House. This is I want to say amazing, but you laid out so clear why it's not amazing, because on one hand, anything that conservatives say that could possibly be construed as promoting violence, possibly, is publicized and made to be an example of why the right is so dangerous and so violent. But here you have a clear case of an attorney general candidate calling for the murder and saying that he would do it himself. This is the important part. He would do it himself. to that point, and this guy's an attorney, I presume. I guess you have to be an attorney to be AG in Virginia. Maybe not. I guess he's an attorney. I looked up the statutes in Virginia about terrorist threats, personal threats, things like this. And the best I can figure out here is, in my opinion, based on what I read, he most likely committed a sixth-degree felony in Virginia. Again, this is my interpretation of it. Because he made clear threats, they were to harm somebody, and clearly he would be able to carry them out if he wanted to. I haven't seen anybody talk about prosecution of this. Now, the only thing I can think of is possibly a statute of limitations issue, because it just came out, 3 years or so after the fact. But I do want people to think about this and look it up for yourself about what possible crime that he could have been implicated in, that he could have been charged with. I said, didn't happen maybe for actual legal reasons. It didn't have statute of limitation. But to your point, Mark, this guy wants to be the attorney general, and he cannot think clearly enough and honestly enough, and just within the bounds of normalcy, of common decency, not to suggest the murder of a political rival. I'm going to give you the last word on this topic. We'll move on.
Well, exactly. And I tell you the truth, I don't think he was an attorney. I think I know out of college he went to work for Goldman Sachs in New York, and his position was not as an attorney there. So I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think he's an attorney. He was they're basically their House of Representatives. But I think also what we have to look at is, sometimes you can justify someone's comments when they're, right out of college, they're young still, immature. We all said stupid things when we were younger and stuff. But this gentleman this is 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. He's been an elected official. So it's not like he was just out of college or in college. He was an elected official at that time when he when he made these comments. He comes from a background of where you would think he would know better, if it wasn't something that he actually was feeling in his heart, because you would think he would know better. His father was a judge. His father was also a representative. So his family background, you would think he would know better. So that's a lot of that stuff is really troubling. He has had, he did have that reckless driving in 22, where I think he was going 116 miles an hour in a 70 mile an hour zone. He got off pretty easy. I think he got 1,000 hours of community service out of it. 500 of those hours were to his own own party that he was doing community service for, basically himself in essence. And so he has gotten off pretty easy in the past. And I think people, when you don't have consequences for your actions, you don't think of it in that regards. For him to be able to say these things or text these things, and as you mentioned, clearly made the other person uncomfortable, where the other person was telling him to stop, and he continued. That right there tells you a lot about this person. And so I think he did what, it was 3 years ago. I think there's enough there to disqualify him for running for attorney general, especially that office. Because that office, think about it. He is the top law enforcement officer for Virginia if he wins. And for him to have this background, I think it disqualifies him.
I know I say give you the last word, but you bring up some good points. It just sparks thoughts for me. This would, to me, it would be a feather in the cap for the Democrat Party, certainly Virginia Democrats, if they outright condemned this and said, I can't support this guy. It would give them some credibility, and for the many of the reasons that you laid out, Mark. Don't think it's going to happen. So we will see. God bless Virginia. I hope this creep doesn't somehow become their AG. Moving on to creeps. Mark, you and I, one thing we have in common, outside of being CHP officers, is that we both did a lot of time in the field. We consider ourselves actual real cops, and aside from our administrative work. And, one of the things that was just pounded into us is that we're out there to, obviously, if we can't protect ourselves, and we can't protect the public. And along with that, kind of that first unwritten rule is that, we have to protect our fellow officer, no matter what the uniform is. And when a fellow officer calls for help, and man, I'm sure you've been there, I was there, other agencies call for help, or when I've called for help, in the first agency that shows up is an allied agency, man, it gives you goosebumps, because you're putting out there, in our case, $11.99, and the first backup, just because of, geography, they're the closest, to you, shows up. And like in my case, was Pasadena Police Department. It was LAPD would show up even before your own team, so to speak, showed up. It just like, it makes you emotional. Guys, thanks. Oh no, dude, hey, we're all, the same. When you see something that we're going to talk about now happen, it just, the level of anger on my part, I tell you right now, some of the language I want to use, which I rarely use, on the air, I try not to use too much in my personal life, but I don't meet my own standards, it's really off the charts. And with that said, Anthony, can you go ahead and cue up that the clip? This is Chicago Police Department radio traffic, and this is from the National News Desk here. Anthony, go ahead and hit that.
And one is for the hit and run. This guy fled from the scene at 37th Place in Kedzie. It all started at I-55 in Kedzie. Then they fled southbound at Kedzie, where that offending vehicle crashed. They ran the federal agent off the road.
Yeah, hold tight until I give you further direction, please.
If you guys can start heading there as quick as you can, and then just hold tight for instructions with 999.
For the Chief of Patrol, clear everybody up. We're not responding over there.
Radio check. And again, per the Chief of Patrol, we have all the units that, per 999, Chief of Patrol said all units clear out from there. We're not sending anybody over to that location.
That's fine. If you couldn't hear that clearly, if you're only listening to the show right now, in short, this was a Chicago Police Department. This was a call to the Chicago PD from ICE agents that were doing their job constitutionally within the law. They were doing their job, and they were surrounded and threatened by a large mob in the city of Chicago. And for those of you who are watching, you can see it. You could see the transcript there. It said, hey, we need help. We're being surrounded. They call Chicago PD. It's a CPD there. The dispatcher, she's doing her best to coordinate responding units to go assist the ICE agents. And as she's saying that, she gets a directive, apparently from the Chief of Patrol, who overrides her instructions, said, nope, no one's responding there. Have all the units, say 1022, disregard it, back off. And this, Mark, clearly has to be a politically motivated, influenced decision by this Chief of Patrol to order his officers not to respond to assist an allied agency. We're not talking about ICE requesting Chicago Police Department to come help them identify, take into custody illegal immigrants, to help with search warrants, help with entries, requesting a SWAT team, requesting a transport in custody. Nothing. They're requesting Chicago Police Department because, just like a private citizen, they're saying we need help because we are in fear for our safety. It's as simple as that. Now, I'm going to give you the floor here in a second, but a couple days after this happened, the chief of Chicago Police Department comes out to do some CYA, and he's trying to, clean up the mess here, and saying that blah blah blah. We never got an order. I've never given an order not to respond to help ICE, and so forth and so on. And he did a pretty good job near the end of his thing of saying, hey, this basically won't happen again. I don't know if it will or will not happen again, but clearly it happened here. And the question is this: if I guess it's Cook County there in Chicago, I believe, if the sheriff's department had called, hey, we're surrounded by a mob, the Chicago Chief of Patrol, and certainly the dispatcher who didn't, and the officers who didn't, they wouldn't question, geez, what is the sheriff's department doing? What task are they, undertaking, blah, blah. They will just say, these guys and gals are asking for help because they're in fear for their safety. We're rolling code 3. They didn't hear, and in my opinion, I think it's pretty straightforward. It was strictly out of political reasons. You got it.
Very, very troubling. I mean, you have to look at different aspects. Now, I'll give you a little bit of my experience. I remember being involved in a number of situations where we called for backup. I started my career in Newhall, Santa Clarita, Valencia area, and there would be calls for backup, for 1199 situations. And for people that aren't familiar with the Highway Patrol and with the way it works, there are area offices, and sometimes these area offices can be 100 miles away from each other, easy 100 miles. And I remember that when everything was starting to clear, and you start talking to the different officers that showed up, they would show up from the sheriff's department, they would show up from LAPD, from different divisions in LAPD, because they heard about it. And we were LA County, we weren't even in LAPD's area, but LAPD would roll up to where we were. We had an officer that showed up one time from Bakersfield all the way to Newhall.
Now tell everybody listening how far that is.
That's probably close to 100 miles away, but they were rolling. They were on the south end of their area. Maybe they had gone into Fort Tejones area a little bit, but when they heard about it, they started responding. So when that call comes out, you're basically, at that point, you get that nasty feeling in your stomach, because somebody's in trouble. And for an officer to put out that call, it's trouble, and you're going and you're responding code 3 to get there to assist, and to do what you can do. And I remember being in one of my other areas, and a call comes out for cover, and we start responding, and the sergeant tells us to hold and stage at a certain area. And at that time, being a young officer, I didn't understand that. I just wanted to go, and I was going to go no matter what. But what was happening was the sergeant was getting more information of what was going on exactly. He didn't want us to drive into a crossfire or anything along those lines. So he wanted us to make sure we approached the right location. He was thinking tactically. But even then, we were, very upset, because when we hear that call, we don't want to stop. We don't want to hold. We're going to respond. So, I mean, that part of it to me was upsetting, to see that they would do this and not respond. Okay. The other thing you have to look at it is, we all know this is political, and you have a mayor who the chief of police is appointed position, and that chief of police is going to do what the mayor tells that person to do. You have a mayor who is under a governor, and the governor is going to give direction also. So this is coming from the top down. I mean, it was basically, we all know what was said. It was, if ICE asked for assistance, we're not giving them assistance of any type. So it's unfortunate, but it's political, and we know
it is. And I think, I said this: the chief comes out, and I'll tell you why. I mean, in my opinion, the chief comes out. First of all, to any cop, this is embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing, even for Chicago Police Department. When I say that, I'm not talking about the rank and file. I'm talking for the leadership, like you said, who's beholden to the governor and to the mayor, who hate ICE, hate the current administration. And I say that, I mean, I think that, I think someone said the other day that if I can't remember, it was the governor or the mayor, in other words, the mayor, if you loved your city as much as you hate Donald Trump, then things will be a lot safer in the city of Chicago. And I just think that is true. I just think that it's true. One of the reasons that I think that the leadership, and I put that word in quotes, and we're going to talk about real leadership here in a minute, was so embarrassed is probably because the police union, I'm sure, got on the phone right away and had some choice words for the chief of patrol, things like this. And because so much media was targeted, at them after the fact, that they had to come out and do some type of damage control. I can't imagine what this does, Mark, to the rank and file's morale for Chicago PD, because you and I have been on that end where we're not just responding, asked to backup. We were the ones, and I've been there a number of times, calling for backup. and calling for backup. At least I tell you, at least for one time, I'm thinking if I don't get help, I'm going to end up on the fountain at the academy. In other words, I'm going to be killed. And then when you juxtapose that to other officers who've been in that position where they need help and they've gotten help, then being told they cannot go assist a fellow law enforcement officer, it's got to be so angering and so demoralizing that, in other words, it's going to have an effect on them. And I certainly hope that chief has had, is walking around to the different stations there, the precincts, and talking to officers about, hey, this won't happen again, and blah, blah, blah. Whether he means it or not, he ought to be having that talk. But this really exemplifies the differences that we're dealing with from one side of the political spectrum to another. There's no other way to put it. I was talking with a friend last night about this, about chiefs of police, and I've talked about this before on the show. The difference between, and you brought this up, Mark, that the chief of police is appointed, and he's beholden, works for the mayor, and things like this, and that kind of political philosophy is going to run downhill, or the chief leaves town if he doesn't support it. You don't have this for the most part with sheriffs because they're elected. Sheriffs are elected, and they are beholden to the people who put him in office, not the one person who appointed him or her. Big difference here. And more, the difference could not be starker, like from California than here in Walton County, Florida, where I live. It's a whole, obviously, different mentality. And it's one of the reasons we have a pretty low crime rate, and we take care of criminals right away. This is going to have impact on Chicago PD for a while. Just as Brandon Johnson, the mayor, who we'll talk about a little more, is going to have devastating impact. So going from lack of leadership to clear, strong leadership is coming up next year. And I love this, Mark, because it's so controversial, the things that we're going to hear in a minute. It's so, I put that in words, so controversial for people out there in media. Oh my God, who talks like this? And this is tyrannical and blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not talking about the president. I'm talking about one of his secretaries. And with that, Anthony, can you cue up, this is fantastic. Can you cue up Pete Hegseth, the cut one? Don't play it yet. This is from just several days ago when he addressed pretty much the top command staff of all the military branches. And you talk about leadership, and you talk about a departure from what we have been subjected to the last previous 4 years. Anthony, go ahead and play cut one.
Good morning and welcome to the War Department. Because the era of the Department of Defense is over. You see, the motto of my first platoon was, "Those who long for peace must prepare for war." This is, of course, not a new idea. This crowd knows that. The origin dates to the 4th century Rome and has been repeated ever since, including by our first commander-in-chief, George Washington, the first leader of the War Department. It captures a simple yet profound truth. To ensure peace, we must prepare for war. From this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: warfighting, preparing for war and preparing to win, unrelenting and uncompromising in that pursuit. Not because we want war, no one here wants war, but it's because we love peace. We love peace for our fellow citizens. They deserve peace, and they rightfully expect us to deliver it. Our number one job, of course, is to be strong so that we can prevent war in the first place. The president talks about it all the time.
Anthony, stop it there. Mark, I'm going to give you first shot at this, and there's 3 more short clips I want to play, but I want to give you first shot at this with Pete Hegseth.
Well, you see the difference right there as far as his mentality and the way he's approaching war, in essence, and preparing for war. So, he looks at it from a point of strength, and, and he's taken a leadership position on it, and that's big leadership. Just to go back a little bit on what we were just talking a little while ago, okay, that mayor, that chief of police, that
Chief of Patrol.
the chief of patrol, they've lost those troops. They've lost them. If there was a vote of no confidence with that department right now, they would be out. I mean, definitely, their troops have lost it. And now going back to Secretary of War, what he's saying, he's taken it from a position of of leadership, and he's outlining what his frame of mind is. And for anybody who's a soldier in the military or even law enforcement, that's what you like to see. You like to see that strong leader.
What I loved about this, Mark, is that this short clip, I still have a few more short ones, is that he didn't just make these statements. He made the statements in relation to historical basis. In other words, he cited Rome's philosophy about war. He cited George Washington's philosophy about war, and making it clear that this is not new. This is not radical. What's radical is the departure from these principles and standards that we've seen in recent years. That's the radical thing. That is the departure from leadership. That's what's been radical. But this type of leadership, this type of adherence to standards, we're going to see that here just in a couple of minutes. This is what so many people, pundits, experts, these brilliant folks on certain news channels are telling us is radical. That Pete Hegseth is a warmonger, that he is incapable, that he is a blowhard. All he's doing is returning us to the positions, the philosophies, the standards that made American military and law enforcement and so many other aspects of American culture the greatest in the world. He does a great job about this in a couple of minutes. With that said, actually, Anthony, go ahead and cue up cut 2. I think it's very short here. If you can play that for us. Hit it.
Promoting risk-averse, go-along to get-along conformists instead. You name it, the department did it. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department, but not.
Exactly right. It was 20 seconds, and I love it. Listen, I love the play on words. They went from the Defense Department back to the War Department as it was originally, and he said we became the woke department. And Mark, I want to talk about this. I'm going to let you respond to that. Specifically what Pete said, but I do want to talk about how this applies to what you and I observed and continue to observe with the California Highway Patrol and with law enforcement in general, specifically in California. But I'll let you respond to Pete. Go ahead.
Just to give you a perspective from a parent side, mm-hmm. The prior administration, I have a younger son who is of age to be drafted in case of war, and people talk about how that President Trump's going to get us in a war and everything along those lines. But I'll tell you the truth, I was more concerned that my son was going to be drafted into a war under the past administration, because we did look weak to the rest of the world. And bottom line, what it comes down to is, when you're talking about countries like China and North Korea, Iran, we look weak to those countries under the past administration. And if there was ever a chance that we could be involved in a war, it was under that past administration. Under this administration, we're coming in from a position of power, and you and I both know this. The world looks at us a lot different than they did a year ago. Okay, they're looking at us from a completely different spectrum, and they know that this country, you're not going to be able to play these games with us. And to tell you the truth, it makes me as a parent feel a lot better about, how this nation is moving forward, because he is looking at it from a position of power.
Well said. And to that point, it's not as if, by the way, we know the current administration has prioritized the revamping, the expansion of our military. And I think it's as good as it is today, as good as it was 2 years ago. It's going to get better and better. In other words, for resources with weapons, things like this. But the important thing, to your point, is we've pretty much had the resources. But the difference is how our enemies perceive our leadership. This is so important. In other words, from January 19th of this year until January 20th, in other words, the military didn't change 100% one way or the other. But what did change, and it continues to change and continues to promote itself, is the leadership of those resources, of those young men and women on the front lines and willing to be on the front lines. This is what makes all the difference. Look, I think you and I have seen this in law enforcement and in our beloved Highway Patrol. And you and I we both love the California Highway Patrol. And that's why sometimes, like being a parent, you love your kids, but you can't love your kids if you're not willing to set down standards and say, hey, you know what? You kind of went off the reservation here and got to get you back on the right path. We do the same thing with the CHP because we love the California Highway Patrol. And I think that we have seen look, as a new officer even, I saw things and I complained about it. I mean, all the way up to the chief. I had to get permission from my sergeant to go to the lieutenant to go to the captain go to the assistant chief, all the way to the chief. I had a meeting about political correctness. And this is 26 years ago, Mark. And this came down to just what Pete was talking about there. It came down to focusing on increasing the numbers of certain groups in our academy classes. And which I don't have a problem with as long as it's done within the framework of adhering to existing standards. No problem whatsoever. But once you start to bastardize or you start to eliminate or you start to massage standards in order to allow certain individuals to get in, you've lost your way. And this is why I was so angry about it and took it all the way to the chief about my concerns about some recruitment aspects. So this has been going on for a long time. It's evolved in what we see now, DEI and the wokeism, as Pete Hegseth said. But you have if not unique, you had a very specialized role in that as being a PT instructor at the academy twice, once as an officer and later on as a sergeant. And I want to get your take on that when it comes to real standards and what the weak link in it. In other words, your chain is only as strong as your weakest link. And I want to get your perspective about this, having seen this over years, being as an officer, going back to the field, coming back as a sergeant with the CHP and adhering to or not to standards.
Well, it's like the secretary said, they're getting rid of the wokeness. They're concentrating on the mission, what the mission is, and that's extremely important. And what is the mission? And when you look at for law enforcement, what is our mission? Okay, our mission is to provide safety and security to the public, and and we have to do that in a way that is acceptable, obviously, but at the same time, it does require a lot of training, critical training, and starts in the academy. When I went through long time ago, 1983, I was a cadet, and I went into the academy, and it was paramilitary. We would go in there, and there was no messing around. Staff was, the PT staff, we called it the staff office at that time. I mean, they were on us constantly. There was a lot of stress in the academy. They worked us, day and night at times, and there was a lot of stress. And I understood the reason for this was. The reason was that we had to be able to basically function under stress. We were going to be involved in stressful situations. And I thank God I went through that type of training, because I was involved in a lot of high stress situations, and I had to think clearly, and I had to condition myself. Now, luckily I had a lot of training coming in, because I was raised by a single mother who was extremely strict. And so I was just happy when I got to the academy when I found out they can't hit us. So I was like, oh, this is awesome. They can only yell at us. They can't hit us. I thought that was awesome. But I understood the importance of it, and there were a lot of things that, that probably, if society would look at it, they'd say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys are doing that, but there was a reason for it. There was always a reason for it. Then when I went back as an instructor, okay, I carried on that same mentality, that same.
Yes,
stress.
you did. And I'm going to chime in there, and I'll tell you right now, I am so grateful for the stress that you and your colleagues put me under. I'll speak for myself. I was grateful for it. Didn't like it. It wasn't the best, 4 or 5 months of my life, but I'm grateful for it. Go ahead.
No, and that's the thing, is that to me it was putting the cadet under a stressful situation. And it was also, a lot of our job was, there's a lot of people, there's in our society, think about this. There are people that are really, really good at painting houses, and there's people that can't paint a house. There's people that are, really good attorneys. And then there's other people that are not very good attorneys, can't pass the bar, can't do that, There's all kinds of things in society that people can't do. Law enforcement is no different. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that go into law enforcement for the wrong reasons, or they're just simply not capable to handle the stress. They're physically not capable. And a lot of our job was to find these people and basically, lay it out to them that they don't need to go into this type of work, because they're going to get themselves hurt, or they're going to get somebody else hurt. So at that time, just to give you an idea, at that time, the Highway Patrol was known for having the largest attrition rate at any academy. Mm-hmm. We were, in California, we were number one as far as for attrition rate, but we also had the lowest during FTO, which meant the people that we were sending out were well-trained and ready to go. And they were passing their FTO. We'd get calls all the time. We'd get calls from the field, talking, and they, just how we get calls from the field, saying that, this person you send us, is horrible. We would get calls, telling us that the people that were coming out were squared away. They were really good. And we got more of those calls than we got the other calls, And so, we continued that, what I had learned, I continued that with when I was an officer, and putting that stress in the training. And like I said, a lot of it, there was a reason for it. It was hard. It could be cruel at times, to the extent that we were telling people what they didn't want to hear, And then when I went back as a sergeant, I was asked to come back as a sergeant because the commander at that time, great guy, Troy Abney, mm-hmm. he wanted to bring back that old mentality, and he wanted us to work within parameters, but also, really take charge of the cadet training and, basically implement standards to get the best recruit to graduate from the academy to send to the field. And that's what we tried to do. We saw, and in our last podcast, we talked about all the difference in mentality and difference in people. And I think what happened was, and going back to what the Secretary of War said, is we allowed the wokeness to start coming into law enforcement. And we, you know, when you went through, were you offended? You know, yeah, your feelings may have been hurt, you know, but
Not even that.
were you offended? You know, you weren't offended because you knew that was part of the job. That was part of what the training that you were going through. But as time has moved on, we have allowed people to make excuses for being inadequate in what they were trying to do. And instead of taking responsibility for that, then it's somebody else's fault. It's the instructor was too mean. The instructor raised their voice to me. The instructor made me feel bad. You know, we started going with that down that road, and you know, and basically law enforcement has to get back to what they do. Law enforcement has to go back to their training. I personally feel, because in speaking to officers throughout California, I'm not just talking California Highway Patrol, I'm talking about other agencies. Speaking to officers from other agencies, they are seeing the same issues of entitlement, people coming in with the attitude of entitlement and ill prepared. You know, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but being a police officer is not a popular thing anymore. You know, so now your numbers go down to people that are putting in for these positions. So now you have agencies fighting over numbers. Now it becomes a numbers game. When it's a numbers game, it is very, very dangerous for law enforcement, because now it's not quality, it's quantity.
I've got to get a body in the seat.
You got to get a warm body in there to you know, to basically to get your staffing levels up. And that's the scary part, when you're just trying to fill those seats.
Yep. Mark, you know, I talk about this time where I got a meeting with the chief when I was an officer regarding recruitment, because they had asked me to be part of a recruitment program. Long story short, when I got there, I got, this is absolutely abhorrent. This is unbelievable that we're engaged in this. When I got to this meeting they were having for this recruitment, and I was so angry, I went back and, you know, I said, went up the chain of command like I'm supposed to, and the chief, you know, God bless him, he yeah, come on, you know, yeah, have Mark come down, and went down when they were with my rep, and really I went off, and I remember this day, it's 26 years ago, but I said, Chief, we are a law enforcement agency. We are not a social experiment. And this is exactly what we've seen in law enforcement since then, and before then, but since then, and in the military. And this is what Pete Hegseth is talking about. To your point, Mark, about the trust in the academy, and about, oh, you know, my feelings. And by the way, and only people who have been through this, like you and I have, can really appreciate this. But the changes now, for legal reasons and all kinds, I think probably social reasons, to the academy. I mean, I probably wouldn't recognize, you know, some of the scheduling, things like this. But I guess here's the question: if this person or that person feels that, you know, the physical training schedule is too rough and they can come and go if they please, or whatever it is. In other words, if it's unfair to one person, why have it at all? In other words, what's the point of physical training? Do you not need to be in the best shape when you're out there pushing a black and white up and down the Golden State Freeway? Do you not need to handle stress when you stop a car with a couple of gangbangers in there who don't want to go to jail for the third time? Do you not require the ability to think quickly on your feet, to use demeanor? Do you not require all these things? Why have it at all? If it's so controversial to this person or that person or whatever it is, then why have it at all? We all know the answer, because when you get out there and the stuff hits the fan, we all fall back. We all fall back on those days where, you know, you may want to quit the academy, or am I going to make it, or I can't take this. That's to prepare you for these situations out there in the field. And if it's good for one person or bad, then it's good or bad for everybody. because the reality of being a police officer does not care about your race, about your sex, about your sexual identity, about what God you worship or don't worship. It doesn't care. The person who wants to kill you does not care about any of those things any more than they care about if you're left-handed or right-handed. They don't care. They don't want to go to jail, and you have a job to do. Those are two realities. And so this is what we've seen in the military as well. I remember a very famous talk show host. This is probably 30 more years ago now, probably 35 years ago. I was listening to his show. He's talking about the military. He wasn't in the military. He was talking about it. And this is when we saw things going sideways at that time in the military. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of the military, two things: to kill people and break things. I said, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. That's the purpose of the military. And more broadly, it's the threat of being able to kill people and to break things that obviously deters people from actually inciting a war to begin with, as Pete said. With that said, Anthony, I want you to, in a second here, I want you to play cut 3. It's about 35, 36 seconds long. And you can go ahead and do that now. Cut 3, Pete Hegseth. Hit it.
To remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department. To rip out the politics. No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that shit.
Bingo. Mark, I just don't think, and we covered a lot of this in our last round of discussion here, but I just don't think it can be said any more clearly than that. Do you?
No, exactly. He hit the mark. My job as a PT instructor, defensive tactics instructor, my job was to train the cadet to the best of my ability, so when they went out in the field, they would go home at the end of their shift, that they would survive their entire career. That was my job, to make sure that I prepared them properly. And it wasn't, like the secretary says, it wasn't anything about, wokeness. It wasn't anything about, because like you said earlier, the person out there, the criminal, doesn't care about your, how your feelings are or anything along those lines. And like I said, my job was to prepare that cadet to become an officer and to be an excellent officer, and that they could make it to the end of their career. And I'll tell you, after doing it for several years, probably one of the best compliments that I've received, I could probably say it is the best compliment that I've received, is I've spoken to several officers who, some of them have gone up to, captains, chiefs, so on. And the best compliment I got from them was that thanking me. They said they hated it when they went through it, but they thanked me for what they went through. And several of them said that when they were there on the side of the road fighting on the ground with someone, they could hear me yelling at them not to quit. And it really made me feel like, okay, I did what I wanted to do. I always said, if I could save one person from dying on this job, to me it was all worth it, and it was worth it. And I look back on my career, and I'm happy. I'm happy I was able to do what I was able to do, and at times had support of most of the staff, as far as the command staff, to be able to do what I did for them, to make sure that they made it home. And it's great to see them now. A lot of these guys are retired, like yourself, and that they made it. They made it throughout their career, and and it's sad when we had to bury some of them. That was always a bad thing for me. But nevertheless, it's just great to see how many have made it throughout their career.
Mark, it reminds me of, it was one morning, you and Keith Smith, who was your fellow PT instructor officer at the time. I don't know, it was probably 5 in the morning. You took all of us out to the fountain. And ladies and gentlemen, the fountain there at the CHP Academy is ringed with brass nameplates of officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty, CHP officers. And you wrapped us around that fountain, about 100 of us. And if I remember correctly, I think there was at least one person on there, maybe two, that you and or Keith Smith knew, but you talked about, look, folks, and by the way, this is getting close to graduation, where at that point you knew that the people you're talking to were going to make it out of the academy. And you instilled in us the purpose. Look, this is why we've done with you what we've done, so you don't end up on this fountain. And, I was blessed. I mean, I just blessed to have appreciated the reality, long before that day. Some people weren't, they didn't. And I think if any time it sunk in there. But I'll tell you right now, it struck a nerve with me. Reality really hit home. It's not that I didn't understand it or didn't believe it. But man, the way you guys talked to us that morning, and I assume you did this with every class. I'm sure that you did. But for me, it was a point where what you guys had done and the energy that you had poured out with us, and quite frankly, sometimes because we worked hard and we'd be jackasses, things like that. You had fun with us too. It wasn't all, we're just here to make your lives as miserable as possible. There were rewards every once in a while there. And it was really, really important because it exhibited to us, these guys are, and gals, because we had some female instructors as well. These guys and gals are real people who really want to help us as much as we may hate them from time to time. And it was a really important balance. And I wanted to acknowledge that. But that day at that fountain, man, that was so poignant. It was so moving, so touching. And I would imagine it probably saved a couple of lives there that you were talking to that day. Anthony, we're gonna play the final clip here from Hegseth, clip 4, and it's about 50 seconds long, 51.
Units,
Go ahead and hit
it.
There are
many different stripes across our joint force. The era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now. At every level, either you can meet the standard, either you can do the job, either you are disciplined, fit, and trained, or you are out. And that's why today, at my direction, and this is the first of 10 Department of War directives that are arriving at your commands as we speak and in your inbox. Today, at my direction, each service will ensure that every requirement for every combat MOS, for every designated combat arms position, returns to the highest male standard only.
Period. This sums it up right here. I'm going to give you on Hegseth here, Mark. I'm going to give you the final word on this. But what Pete Hegseth there goes right back to what we talked about with the Chicago Police Department Chief of Patrol. Pete Hegseth, and again, remember, he's talking to the top leadership in our military forces right now. He is not only telling them what his expectations are, which is so important when it comes to leadership, clear expectations. He's also empowering them to make decisions based on that objective, that we want the best and the brightest, period. There's no, well, maybe, if, ands, or buts, well, here's an exception, period. We want the best and brightest. He's empowering those men and women sitting in that audience not to ever find themselves, or more accurately, put themselves in the position of that chief of patrol for Chicago Police Department. You do what the mission calls you to do. In the case of Chicago PD, is ensure the safety and security not only of the citizens of Chicago, the people of Chicago, but also your fellow law enforcement officer without any reservation, without any question whatsoever. That's your mission. The politics can go to hell. I'll deal with the politics afterwards as the leader. You fulfill your mission of safety and security. The same thing here. So with that said, I'm going to give you the final word on Hegseth.
That right there, when you look at the Secretary of War, those of us that have been involved in law enforcement or military or both will say that's a leader. That's a person who is a leader. And unfortunately, that's something that's been missing quite a bit with good example, Chicago Police Department. Leaders. We need people that are leaders who know the mission, and regardless, it's not about wokeness. It's not about anything along those lines. It's about what you have to do to ensure the safety of the public, the safety of a nation, and do what you need to do, and not worry about DEI, not worry about wokeness, not worry about all these other things that get in the way. When you look at it, and I've talked to a few guys that are in the military, and they are so happy right now. Mm-hmm. They are, they say Christmas came early because they have a leader, they have somebody who will back them and knows what the mission is. And that's what gets lost in all this. And, for law enforcement and for the military, what is our mission? And what do we need to do to ensure that we give the officers, we give the military the tools that they need to basically be able to do the mission and go out there and keep people safe. And that's what gets lost in all this. So I'm happy, tell you right now, I'm happy with his leadership. I hope that will transfer over to law enforcement.
Well, let's pray that it does, Mark. And Anthony, I'm going to ask a favor of you, and you can just talk to me in the headphones here. Let me know if it's a problem. Can we go out of order and queue up Brandon Johnson next? This last two we'll do out of no problem. And there's a reason for thanks, Anthony. There's a reason. I just figure we'll just keep this all tied in. We have 2 clips left total. And Anthony, go ahead and about 43 seconds on
state officials consider
Brandon
it
Johnson,
unlawful.
I believe here. Hit it.
Joining us now to discuss this further is Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. So, Mayor, we're going to get to the National Guard in just a minute. But first, President Trump this morning called for you, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, to be jailed for, quote, failing to protect ICE officers. What is your response?
Well, first of all, this president is unstable, unhinged, a double-minded individual that, quite frankly, is a threat to our democracy. And it's certainly not the first time that Donald Trump has called for the arresting of a black man unjustly. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay firm as the mayor of this amazing city, which was voted 9 years in a row the best big city in America, and we're going to defend all of Chicago.
Yeah, and to be clear, he's also calling for the governor, J.B. Pritzker, to be jailed as well. What are you hearing?
Stop it there, Anthony. Now, look, folks, this is CNN. I didn't pull up Fox. I didn't put Newsmax or the Heritage Foundation. This is CNN. And the reason I wanted Anthony to play Brandon Johnson first there, the glorious mayor of Chicago, is because it ties into finishing up with Chicago and the leadership there. Here he is, juxtaposed, Mark, to what you and I have been talking about, to what Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, is talking about here, about taking race and gender identity and on and on and on and on, and all these immutable characteristics, all this ancillary crap out of it and going back purely to standards. Here he is exemplifying the opposite. I said juxtapose what we're talking about. And he goes so far as to say that the reason that Trump, says that he and Pritzker should be arrested is because he's black. not because he's not doing his job, not because he's interfering and delaying the actions of, duly sworn officers who are performing their duties, per the Constitution, per legislative law, but it's because of his race. Now, the reason I bring up the CNN aspect is because even this CNN reporter says, oh, okay, Mayor, but he called for the arrest of Pritzker too, who is not black. So she called him out on it, and God bless her for doing it. But this is the hole that these people who just deny reality, who are not focused or not concerned with providing security, safety, a civil society to their constituents, but are more focused on hating their political rivals. This is the hole they dig themselves into. This is their reset button. This is their default. Whatever analogy or word you want to use, this is where they go back to every time. To your point much earlier in this episode, Mark, you talked about making excuses. These people making excuses for everything. And when I say these people, I'm talking about people who don't want to adhere to standards. And this is a prime example that even CNN said, you realize the other guy he wants to arrest is white, don't you? It's despicable. And I'm going to let you chime in there on the glorious leader of the city of Los Angeles. Her too, by the way, but the city of Chicago. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, it's like people say, conservatives say this all the time. President Trump only became a racist when he became a Republican. If you look at his past, and you'll know that he wasn't a racist. There's a famous picture of him with a number of black leaders getting awards for his community service with the black community and what he had done. So they always like to throw that out, that he's a racist and he's this, and he's that, and everything like that. But they don't address the issues, the problems, And I'll tell you right now, I've been to Chicago. I was in Chicago probably about 3 years ago. That city's dangerous. I mean, it gets dangerous. I mean, we were out in front of a hotel, and we ended up getting and this was a nice hotel we were out in front of, and it was right off the Miracle Mile, and we got lit up by somebody came by, vehicles came by with paintballs, and the good paintballs, the ones that hurt, and they lit us up right there in this nice area. There was carjackings that were occurring right down this block from the hotel. There was a barricaded suspect, and this is all in the span of about 3 days. Had a barricaded suspect. They had an officer who they were looking to charge, an off-duty officer. This is the kind of mentality you have down there. This off-duty officer is coming out of a grocery store, and she gets they try to rob her. She has her gun. She pulls her gun out. She shoots at the guys, and they take off. And they were looking to charge her because she discharged the weapon, and it could have hit somebody. So they things along those lines where you sit there and you go, you've got to be kidding. So yeah, that city is a mess, really. And like I said, I was there. I personally saw what was going on.
Oh, Mark, you're just making this up. According to the governor and the mayor, it's the safest place to live. Oh, now, just disregard those 5 or 6 people who die every weekend. Other than that, it's a wonderful place to live.
And the 50 that are shot.
The 50, by the way,
yeah.
This is a good point. With all these drive-by shootings, gang on gang. Which, look, the fact is that these are most of the casualties in these crimes. It's criminal on criminal for the most part. Not only, but for the vast majority are. But the only reason that these death tolls are not higher, not just in Chicago, but any place in the country, is because medical technology is so far advanced than it was, say, 30 years ago. When we started 40 years ago, my brother was an LA City paramedic. He was a firefighter for 30 years. He's a paramedic for about 20 of those 30 years. And he talks about this, how people that, they leave the hospital the next day nowadays might have died in 1990 or 1985, things like this. But your point is absolutely, so important that the 50 shot, every week here. but it's a wonderful place. So Pritzker has to walk around, I think it's Lake Michigan there, and some Sunday morning and tell you, look how safe it is. Well, yeah, with your 6 security detail and blah, blah, blah. And most criminals are not out tiptoeing around 6 in the morning. Most of them are just going to bed. But anyway, I mean, it's just so obvious. But the idea that you have to go back to, oh, he wants to arrest me because I'm black. This is just, could you just answer the question, dude? But it's a prime example of lack of leadership. To your point about this, I remember that case with the off-duty officer, defending yourself. Of course, you know her as well, probably better than I do, Janet Dial, who's a retired captain in the Highway Patrol, and this is when she was an officer. She got an altercation, I believe it was at an ATM,
Yes.
Mark. She was at an ATM, and it was in a very lovely part of town, not too far from where I grew up. And she was accosted and asked for her money, and by an assailant, a would-be robber. And that gentleman is no longer with us because she turned and through her purse, if I remember correctly, she fired 1 round and it took that guy's life. And when LAPD got there and found who she was, they gave her a thumbs up. Things have changed. And by the way, nobody's happy that by the way, he had a weapon as well and threatened her life is the point. And so she did the right thing to defend herself. No one's happy when anybody dies, even an assailant. But in exchange for your own innocent life, sorry, this is the way it's going to be. And but again, things have changed. The second guessing, the pointing fingers at who's actually responsible, who initiates a confrontation, who's a danger to society, who's doing something to protect themselves or other individuals, other law enforcement agency. Man, things are upside down to just an unbelievable degree. I hope that they are changing, but only time will tell. Final thing, the final clip we're going to watch today, and I wanted to kind of tie, this is why I actually kind of reversed these last 2 clips, because I thought this would go together pretty well. And that's of this lovely young lady who's running for governor in California. I'm sure you're a big fan of hers, I believe. I think, aren't you on her campaign staff, I believe, Mark? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm all over it. I've been putting in the hours and everything like that. Except she yells at me a lot, so I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I'm in charge of bringing her meals, so.
But that must be a full-time job.
Yes.
Anthony, can you go ahead? Well, I'll set this up here. So Katie Porter, who I believe she's a former U.S. Congressperson. I think that's right. I think she's in the Congress. Now she's running to be the next commander-in-chief of California, the next governor of California after your wonderful governor, Gavin Newsom. And this is a clip just from it's a CBS interview. Again, this is CBS, folks. This is not, this is not like the MAGA news channel. This is not Fox News. And I try to bring you these, either an article, not always, but when I can, I bring you a CNN article or USA Today or a PBS. And so now we have CBS here video. If you haven't seen this, it's precious because this woman, and obviously we're only kidding about Mark's involvement. There is none other than voting against her. This clip, this really, to me, this is an indicator of leadership. And no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, doesn't matter. You're Democrat, Republican, whatever. We all do realize that an elected official has to be able to stand up to the fire. They have to be able to navigate, through uncomfortable situations, political pressure, fiscal pressure, you name it, personal pressure. They have to be able to deal with it, take it on, absorb it, and say, you give me some more. That's what a leader does. That's why they're leaders. This person wants to lead the largest state in the union. And here's how she handles this situation with a CBS reporter. Anthony, hit it.
What do you say to the 40% of California voters who you'll need in order to win, who voted for Trump?
How would I need them in order to win, ma'am?
Well, unless you think you're going to get 60% of the vote. So you don't think
I feel like this is unnecessarily argumentative. What is your question?
Well, to those voters. Okay, so you...
I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Okay. Thank you.
You're not going to do the interview with us?
Nope, not like this. I'm not. Not with 7 follow-ups to every single question you ask.
Stop. Look, Mark, I'm gonna jump on this one first. The first thing is here, look, this reminds me of, again, talking about leadership here, folks. I'm trying to talk about leadership. It's not so much about politics. We all know what my politics are. But from a leadership point of view, from a position of responsibility, from a position of preparedness, this woman could not answer a simple question. Do you think you have to get these Trump voters to vote for you in order to win? Or how are you going to do it? You would think that someone in this position would be prepared for that question. It's pretty basic and pretty obvious. And you can give a political kind of cut and paste answer. I have no problem with that. Listen, my job is to win every vote that I can. And I'm confident with my policy positions that we're going to bring some people across the aisle. I'm confident of that. I know I have a very strong Democratic base here in California, but there are people that are hungry on both sides of the aisle for true leadership. And I'm going to continue the legacy of Gavin Newsom in certain ways. I'm going to change certain things that Gavin Newsom didn't do or should have done. And people are going to see that, and they're going to vote for me on both sides. How many I get, I don't know, but I'm going to bring people across the aisle. I just made that up off the top of my head right now. And by the way, I didn't say a whole lot there, but I didn't run from the question. She wasn't ready for this question. How is she to be ready to run the largest state in in the nation? The other thing is here, I'm going to cut this. She's laughing at the camera. She dismisses the reporter there, the interviewer. She just turns her head and she's laugh. This is a complete indication of utter disrespect, of incompetence, of insecurity. This is the big thing. Clear insecurity. You are not confident in your own ability to think on your feet. And that often comes from the complete lack of deep conviction in one silo or another. What do you really believe? What do you stand for? And if you know those basic things, for the most part, you can navigate through any question because you just answer straightforward. Here's what I believe. And here's why I think that I'll bring some people across the aisle and they will vote for me who maybe voted the direction before. She's not able to do that. Mark, I'm going to give you the last word on unfortunately, you're probably your next governor of California. I hope I'm wrong, but.
Well, I hope you're wrong too, and to tell you the truth, you're spot on with your, with her, what you're saying about her. And what she said is spot on. She said, why would I need those 40%? In other words, she's dismissing the rest of us. So she's running for 60% of the state. She's not running for everyone in the state. So I think what the problem where she had the issue in that whole interview was, first of all, she thought it was going to be a bunch of softball questions. They thought it was going to be nice and easy and it wasn't going to be anything, asked too hard of her, even though I didn't think that was a hard question. But, where she got messed up was when they gave her the math and 60%. And if there's other Democrats running, then she's not going to have maybe all the 60%. So she may need some of the 40%. So that's when she became frustrated. But like you said, that's somebody who wants to be the leader of the state. And, it's sad to think that someone like that could possibly be our governor in this state, because that person is not prepared.
Well, she's not. She's not prepared. Listen, if she does become governor, Mark, it appears to me that she's, very big into fitness, and maybe she'll hire you to be on the fitness council for California. I'm sure that'll be one of her priorities. just my thought. Yeah, that's a cheap shot. But you know what? If she can't take that kind of heat, I say heat, like you said, this is not a difficult question. She doesn't deserve a whole lot of respect. She should not be she should not be putting herself really kind of in the public here to be a leader if you can't answer a question like that. I know I said to give you the last word there, but I wanted to get my slide in there before we split. Well, I think, Mark, I pray for you, and I mean that. I do pray that California turns around. It will not in the hands of someone like Katie Porter. You certainly won't see any improvement, and you're likely to see it get worse, because I think no more than Gavin Newsom does she really believe in anything other than getting elected, apparently, and that's not a good position for a so-called leader to have. Go ahead.
And if I could say just, one more thing is listen to their words. For your listeners out there, when you hear these politicians talk, listen to what they're saying. Pay attention to what they are saying. When you talk about the mayor, he talks about, how great Chicago is. If you break it down and you actually narrow it down, what is he talking about? How many visitors they get every year from all around the world, or how safe their city is. When you had a Gavin Newsom the other day come out there and he's talking about, blue states and red cities, and he compared the stats that the crime rate was lower in Los Angeles, and I believe he used the state of Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, oh, but if you listen, he's comparing a city to an entire state.
That's right.
And things along those lines. You have to listen to what they say, because they're not lying, but they're not being truthful either. So I always tell people, listen to what these politicians say and how they word things, because they'll play these little games. But unfortunately for California, and unfortunately for the entire country, we've stopped basically electing the most qualified person. Now people are electing based on your political parties, and regardless to how bad that person is, how horrible that person can be, they'll elect that person because they belong to that particular party. And unfortunately, we when I was in my younger days, we would look at the candidate and how good that candidate was, and and that's who we voted for. And that's why in the past we've had Republican governors here, in California, because people voted for who they thought would be the best person to govern. Now it's all based on party lines, so it's unfortunate, and it's unfortunate for California.
It is unfortunate for California, and again, I hope it changes. I'm cheering for California, even though I fled it. It's a beautiful state, and I wish they would once again have beautiful leadership. We'll see what happens. Marc Gomez, California Highway Patrol Sergeant, retired, and sporting your wonderful beard there. You look great. Thanks so much, man. I'm looking forward to having you back, and our friend Kevin Baxter, having him back as well sometime. In the meantime, you enjoy yourself, take care of your family. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless you. We'll see you next time. Oh my gosh. You know what? I would hold up my Dallas Cowboy cup, but even that's broken, just like the team. So it's a tough road. It's a tough road. I do miss the 90s rivalry between the Cowboys and Niners, but and by the way, I like Purdy too. I got to be honest with you. I actually like him, and I wish him the best of luck. They got a good team. All right, dude. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.